most I've paid for a single record is a 45 by a Detroit garage band from the 60s called the Kegs, and that was $2,500 and change. They only pressed 100 of them. The studio they recorded at burned down in the Detroit riots. A whole kind of legendary backstory behind it. I bought it in 2005. So I've had people before say, in regards to eBay, because I bought it on eBay, I would never trust anyone from Italy. Their postal system is so screwed up. So many people get dicked over by Italian transactions. I would never do anything like that. That's where this single was. But then I mentioned the username or the name of the guy who was selling it, and that person said, oh no, that guy's cool. You're the one person you can buy from in Italy is that guy. So I had faith in sending it off. And for me, I was still living at home. I was playing in the Dirtbombs. I didn't have any bills or anything like that. And I'd just gotten back from a tour. And so I think it was a little stretch for me, but it was also a record that I, one, had never even seen in person, and two, never thought I would ever have an opportunity to buy one. Since then, I've had the opportunity to buy a second one, and for some reason, it really, really hurt saying no. Like, what if I need it? Hi, my name is Ben Blackwell. In addition to working at Third Man Records and playing drums in the Dirtbombs and running my own label, Cass Records, and working as official archivist for the White Stripes, I've also been known to collect records. I don't know why Crate Diggers is at my house, but you are watching Crate Diggers. I don't have solid numbers, but I like to think each of those white boxes is 157 inches. And so last time I counted, there was there's maybe about 40 of those boxes. So I think the last count, there was a couple thousand 45s. And that's my main focus. LPs don't really excite me that much. To me, if it's just me and my personality, I'd play 45s all day. An LP, you have to search for the groove and like, what track is it? And looking back and forth. I get why people like them, or 12-inch singles even, but to me, a 45 with a picture sleeve is kind of perfection. It's never really been improved upon. Take that into consideration. That's probably why people are still using it, is because it is so perfect. You know, 2 songs, 2 sides, 2 images, front and back cover. If you can't do that right, you should probably just not do it. This one, I love this record. This is the first, if you ask me, the first rap record from Detroit. Rock Down, parts 1 and 2, parentheses, schoolboy rap, under the name Paris. This is pressed in 1981. Basically all handled by a dude by the name of Daryl Nicholson, who was a teenager at the time. He was working at McDonald's. It sounds like really good, early, live band-backed hip-hop. And not too many people know about this record, but again, I only came across it because it was from Detroit, and realized a lot of people weren't talking about early Detroit rap records. And so I tried to find out more and more about stuff like that, and keep on coming back to this, and couldn't find anything that really predated this. So until someone proves me wrong, this is the first Detroit rap record. Here's one I won't even talk much about, but everyone just needs to see what Greasy Records presents Poncho C. Saint Fingers. If you're not down with that, you can get out of the house. So this is my collections, mainly the 45s, which is the bulk. This is where I choose to spend my time. Organization is kind of all over the place. I feel like I've gone off the deep end. Geographic, which is Detroit, Michigan. Each kind of little subgenre has its own. Subgenre and era have their own things. Detroit, rock music from the 1970s. Detroit, funk, electro, hip hop. Detroit, not punk rock from the 1980s. Post MC5 is kind of everything else. So if it's not, barring geography, so Michigan stuff is not in there, but this whole stack here is basically everything post MC5. David Bowie, Under Pressure, 45 in here. Nirvana records in here. A new single by the OCs would all be in this range. I post MC5 is the best thing to call it. there's some interesting stuff here. This is these can and will survive a house fire. And I can say that from experience. Here's a great record. I love this. This is a record by a band from Detroit called Nick and the Jaguars. Ichiban #1. So it's on the Tamla label. Tamla was the first label that Gordy started in the Motown family. But this was also the first white band that Gordy ever put out. And I guess the rumor is one of the guys in the band was Gordy's lawyer. And he said, hey, put out my kid's band, you know, like they probably only pressed 300 copies of this. They're really, really crude, 1959, kind of like greaser, like in the vein of like Tequila or Dwayne Eddy, instrumental surf. But it's got no bass on it. It's 2 guitar players and a drummer. And this came from the record store I was working at in Detroit, Car City Records. I came in one day to get paid, and someone behind the counter said, hey, did you see that weird Motown single that came in? No, what Motown single? And they pulled this out and was like, holy shit. I'd never seen it before. And you can see the price tag on there, the price tag. This was May of 2004, based on the Car City tag code. And the price on it is $200. The boss owed me $75 for working. And I said, well, I want the record. And he said, okay. He said, give me $100 for it. I said, with pleasure. The record, you know, if you were trying to sell it, it's probably like $600 or $700 record. So this is kind of the deepest pit of weirdo, one-of-a-kind, shouldn't exist, white stripe stuff. You're not going to find any of this anywhere else. So this is their first single, Let's Shake Hands. This is a copy of the record without any of the red ink printed on the sleeve. So it's all white and black. That's one of a kind. Dave Buick, who ran Italy Records, was a sweetheart and an awesome enough guy that he would have done something like this for me to kind of dig. Also in the same vein of that was this printing, which is at the same time that the White Stripes put out their first single, a band from Detroit called the Henchmen put out a single with Jack playing guitar on it. So what Dave did specifically for me was he printed a version of the sleeve with both sleeve art. So you can see the front cover of the Henchmen and the back cover of the White Stripes on there. And then you can see the back cover of the Henchmen and the front cover of the White Stripes right there. As an unpaid intern, I'd take payment of that any day of the week. There's another one. Where is it? This was clearly an error at the pressing plant. United Record Pressing back in 1998 didn't have the most stringent quality control as it does now. That showed up in a box at Italy, and again, as the resident teenager who was excited about anything, they just handed it to me and said, hey Ben, keep this. Rare White Stripes double B-side label, 3/14, 1999. So that is the work of a budding archivist. So here's another White Stripes single with some chicanery in regards to the pressing plates. The runout grooves in this single say LP-9-A. I put that up on some White Stripes collector's board of, this is a copy that I got from the band right when it came out. This would have been in October of 2000. And everyone else posted, no one could find a copy of it. No one could find, people that bought it on the tour, no one could find any information about it. I was like, well, this is the copy I've got, I know. And years later, maybe 10 years later, 9 or 10 years later, I finally played it, and it's not the White Stripes on there. It was a completely different, it's like some hardcore punk band. And so it was one of those ways like, okay, it is a version of the White Stripes record. It's got the labels on it, it's got the red vinyl, but it's not actually the music. This is actually, you can see right there, fake Euro pressing. This is actually a bootleg version. You can tell because the labels are more gray, and it's pressed on red vinyl. This record actually never came out on red vinyl. If money's not an object, I'd probably like to buy a copy of the kind of rarest Motown single, which is this record by Frank Wilson called "Do I Love You?" parentheses, "Indeed I Do." And I think there's 3 known copies of that. And that's sold for, I know, as low as $20,000 and maybe as high as like 35. But basically, you know, one really hardcore Motown collector found one in the early 80s from a guy that worked at the pressing plant. And then I think someone kind of snuck some out of Motown's vault. So I think there's 3 known copies. But that would be, I mean, that would just be a pure wall hanger. This is a nice rare Detroit Garage 45. A band called The Bottle Company. And the song is called Lives for No One. This was actually produced by pre-Eagles fame Glenn Frey. He was active in the Detroit garage scene in the 60s. But this is kind of the hardest to find hideout single. Very, very exciting, important record. This is the sole release while they were still a band by Death. The single Keep on Knockin' and Politicians in My Eyes. One of the best singles of all time. So Death was a group from Detroit, 3 black guys who were all brothers. Recorded just some really, really amped up, crazy. They didn't call it punk rock music. They just thought they were playing hard rock. But this record actually came from a friend of the band, a guy by the name of Don Schwenk, who back in the day, this came out in '76, the band gave Don a box of the records, 25 count box. Said, "Hey, spread the word, help us out, whatever." Don never did anything with them. And he came to the record store that I was working in Detroit called Car City Records, and started handing out copies to the guys working there. He handed out a handful of copies, and this was, at the time, people would pay $800 for this record.
Last night in Detroit.
Moving away from Detroit, moving to Nashville, for me became a real eye-opener of like, wow, everything from Detroit was really, really great, really amazing. And I kind of felt like, like I blew my chance. I lived in Detroit. Like, that's where you're going to find Detroit records. That's where you're going to find interesting stuff. And so, since I've moved, it's kind of been my way of dealing with homesickness, is thinking a lot about Detroit records and just learning about them.
Landscape of Detroit!